All right, what is up, Internet? We're back at the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. We're going to keep this cubbyhole thing moving. I'm going to keep grinding. I know I have a lot of computer work to do, and I'm totally slacking on the next book review, but it's okay. Hopefully, we'll get to some Call of Cthulhu gameplay this weekend, or maybe I'll even read a short story and do a quick review on a H.P. Lovecraft story, or we'll just go ahead and do it the Call of Cthulhu. We'll see. A lot of stuff on going on right here, over here, Beagle Eye Visions. So without further ado, here is the third episode of the Cubbyhole podcast called Aspects, number 3, Aspects of Consciousness. I hope you enjoy. We're going to keep grinding. Hopefully we'll level up today.
And that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue. Is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy, like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
Hello and welcome, all like minds and spirits, to episode 3 of the CubbyWhole podcast, where critical, important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Our website is CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole.com. It is April 20th, 2020, and today we will be finishing up on the topics from our last show, which include the trivium and quadrivium, the truth discovery methodologies, and then continuing into consciousness and cymatics. Unfortunately, Nate cannot join us today, so I will be hosting solo on these topics. I want to give a quick update for the listeners about the Seed for Growth Conference. Unfortunately, due to this medical tyranny lockdown from these authoritarian elite overlords, my location host has informed me that we will not be able to hold the conference at the end of May at that location. So, what I have decided is to postpone the event, and all the details of the event will be updated on the CubbyWhole website and on the Eventbrite website also. If you're interested in getting a refund for your ticket, that is no issue whatsoever. Just get on the Eventbrite page and go through the process of getting your refund, and I'll get that out to you immediately. But we are asking people to actually hold their tickets until the future date, because we will be holding this event no matter what. And as far as the information that I've received from all the speakers, it looks like everybody is still on board coming and speaking at the next event. Now, the timing of this event is still unknown, but I will be sending out mass emails to all those who have bought tickets, and we will continue to advertise, especially as we get closer to the event. I also will be making more public announcements on future episodes of this podcast and on social media networks. So getting right into today's episode, what we had covered on the previous episode was the truth discovery methodologies, which are the trivium and the quadrivium. Just to briefly recap over these, the trivium is the 3 roads, and it's input, processing, and output, or grammar, logic, rhetoric, or knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And then the quadrivium is the 4 roads to truth, the 4-fold path to truth, which is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Both of these combined make up the 7 liberal arts, and these are the most crucial tools that we have at our disposal to actually discover truth for ourselves, to discern falsehood from what is true. And this also falls under the realm of epistemology, of justifications for truth and knowledge are. One good allegory for this that I didn't get to mention last week is Plato's allegory of the cave, which you can find a lot of correlations in a lot of other Greek mythologies and things like that to Plato's allegory of the cave. But this is one great example of breaking through the illusions of deceit and your own illusions of what you think is real compared to actually what reality really is and what truth actually is. So Plato has Socrates describe a group of people who have lived chained to a wall of a cave for all their lives, facing a blank wall. The people watch the shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of the fire behind them and give names to these shadows. And this is the illusions, the shadows. And they actually start to identify with these shadows as real. So, they start to think that is all there is to reality. That is the limited perception that they have. So this goes along with our truth versus perception talk that we were speaking on last week as well. And eventually one of these prisoners gets freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall were not reality at all, though they were a part of reality, but they are not the totality of everything. But metaphorically, we could just look at the shadows as the illusionary constructs of the mind. And he goes out and sees the light. And the first time he sees the light, he or she sees the light, it actually blinds them because it can be very harmful to come into contact with the truth when you first are seeing or hearing it, So that's something we were talking about last week also, is that, truth can be belligerent and is belligerent in a way because it is waging war against illusions and mind control. So that person tries to come back in to free the other prisoners within the cave and show them that the manufactured reality that is the shadows that the prisoners see is not the entire truth. And that's not reality, and it's not exactly what they are perceiving. And most of these people in the cave look at him and ostracize him and scrutinize him and are very rigidly skeptical against what this person has to say. And actually, probably taken to an extreme level, they fight against that truth that he's trying to bring in, that he's trying to enlighten them and free them from these chains, because they're so egally identified and have been so programmed and conditioned to believe that that's all there is to reality. So I think that's a great allegory for looking at what the truth is and how we come into contact with what the truth is, or truth discovery, how we discover the truth. So we're trying to free our minds, and we're trying to use these tools such as the trivium and quadrivium to, get out of that prison of the mind and actually come into the light of true knowledge and of reality. That's what we're trying to do with this podcast also. It's what we try to do with the conference and with our presentations. It's trying to awaken these people who are prisoners in their own mind and actually physical reality to these illusionary shadow constructs that they have believed in wholeheartedly, that is the reality of everything. And I mean, this makes people docile and makes people just want to accept things just as they are. And there's a form of fear that comes in with actually coming out of that cave and coming out of that prison, because it means self-responsibility. So there's a lot of emotions that come up when you approach somebody with the truth that their entire reality is not what they think it actually is. This can be a form of gaslighting. It can be taken in positive and negative ways for like dark sorcery or manipulation, people who want to manipulate people. You can actually gaslight somebody into confusing them about what reality is by making them think that the illusion is what is real rather than the truth. So, I just wanted to add that in there, that there is a negative side that this can be used in a form of manipulation towards people, that you can actually, try to convince people in the illusion rather than the actual truth. But what we're trying to do here is convince people of the actual truth. And it's their responsibility ultimately to come into contact with that. It's their responsibility that they have to, choose to actually want to look for the truth. So one thing in theosophy, which we can get into in the future, one of their main motifs in is that there's no religion higher than truth. Truth is the highest of the high when you get into it. And a quote by Gerald Massey is that they must find it difficult, those who have taken authority as truth rather than truth as authority. And I think that's what we're seeing today, is that a lot of people take the physical man's authority, the belief, the dogma in the authority of man as the truth, as the objective truth, and even, relative truth on both sides, depending on your ideology there, as, the real thing. And that's not what it actually is. The truth is the only real authority in the universe. And the truth is obviously based in objectiveness, no matter what people might perceive it as. One thing I like to bring up is presuppositionals, which is the idea when someone says that there's no such thing as truth, well, is it true that there's no such thing as truth? If it is, then obviously there is such a thing as truth, and it contradicts what they're stating. And if it isn't, then there's obviously such a thing as truth also. So both answers there come back to truth. But to kind of get back into what I was saying, just to give people a little bit more knowledge about epistemology, the word epistemology comes from Greek, and it's episteme, which means knowledge, and an ology is the study of. So it's the study of knowledge, the theory or study of the nature or grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits, validity, and its scope. So this really helps people to get out of the solipsistic mindset when you start to study philosophy, and epistemology is one of the base things in philosophy. You have metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, and we'll be covering all of these. And this is one allegory that really helps you to deal with the ideas of epistemology, and it helps you to deal with in your own mind, and helps you to deal with your own ego and your own illusions that you may have built up or may have been programmed with. But other than that, I think the best way to state it is that truth is simple. It is simply that which is. We can never reiterate that enough. We need to really make truth, the definition of truth, such that a child can understand it. It doesn't need to be taken into some totality of God's knowledge or anything like that. It needs to be a base foundational methodology for how we come to understand reality. And I think that's one problem that people have, is that they think of the truth as some kind of such a grand thing that there's no way you can ever come to understand that. I'm not saying that you can come to know all things, but you can come to understand that which is, or you can understand what truth is. If we were to understand all things at all times and all places, that would literally be the mind of God. And our biggest lesson here is to learn that we are not God. We are a component to aspects of God. If you want to look at it that way, we are a portion of that tapestry, that big divine piece of the universe, or of existence, of reality, however you want to put that, of nature. One of the things that we've done is balkanize epistemology, and we've broken it down into such fine aspects, to such little pieces. It's like taking a mirror and shattering it and then trying to put all those pieces back together. It's not easy to do that when you start to make things complicated. So to make it simple really helps with the mind, and it goes along with what we're trying to do here with the podcast. It's holistic. We can't fully scope all channels of perception all at once, or all channels of consciousness all at one time. That would be having your radio tuned into every single channel that there is out there and trying to make sense of every single channel. You can't do that. You have to tune into that frequency and then make use of that perception of that frequency, and filter through that with the truth methodology, discovery method, the trivium and the quadrivium, and then you come together with other people, or you find a different channel. You tune into another channel. So it's trying to scope full 360 of something, maybe even in a toroidal aspect as well, like a three-dimensional 360, like a sphere, and then trying to find out what that thing is that you're looking at from all angles, but you can't know all angles of that all at one time. And that's a big thing that I think people get confused, is that they're thinking that they can know everything. That's what I mean by the totality of the truth. You can't know all that all at one time. So the radio example is really good. But to kind of continue on here, I think the great little quote from Oracle at Delphi: "Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods." And I think that's a very profound and accurate statement, because this is about knowing the self, the capital S self, which we'll break down in the future, the higher self, and it is about, coming in contact with that inner treasure and opening that chest, within yourself, and having the heart-based consciousness, which we can talk about a lot in the future. I'm sure Nate has a lot to say about the heart-based consciousness, because it correlates to imagination. Nate and I will definitely be breaking down imagination in future episodes. There's no doubt that our imaginations have been pretty much destroyed at a collective level, and this is done for the purpose of keeping the minds incapable of imagining a different condition to be manifested in our world today. But from here, I'd like to go ahead and explain some things about the difference with esoteric knowledge compared to exoteric knowledge. Let's first break down the words. Exoteric comes from the Greek adjective exoterikos, which means external or outside of. We can look at a working definition for this as exoteric knowledge is intended for or likely to be understood by the general public, current or popular among the general public. So this is knowledge that most people have and utilize in their daily life. Esoteric knowledge comes from the Greek adjective esoterikos, which means within or inside. Esoteric knowledge is intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with specialized knowledge or interest, hidden, mysterious, beyond the range of ordinary knowledge, experience, or perception, that which is communicated only to the initiated. And I would also like to add in that a lot of people think that esoteric knowledge is deliberately hidden, but it's not. Esoteric does not mean deliberately hidden. It just means that it is knowledge not widely known to the general public. So that's one thing that you do need to make clear, because I always hear this in, the New Age communities and things like that. Esoteric knowledge is deliberately hidden, but it's not. The only true way to get to the center of the dark and understand truth is by the cultivation of the heart-based intelligence. And this actually means doing due diligence into the esoteric studies and occult knowledge. This is because we have to have enough care to actually want to discover the truth for ourselves. It is the first principle, and principle literally means that which comes first, and the truth is that which comes first. For most people today, they are living in the world without ever coming into true understanding of how crucial the truth actually is. It is like living in a library and never touching the books in that library. This reminds me of the movie Doctor Strange, where he recognizes that the most valuable knowledge is locked up tight, and if it wasn't for him actually getting into those books and dabbling in them, then he wouldn't have the knowledge that is needed to understand what was actually taking place, and thus he wouldn't have been able to actually save the day. That is the equivalent of the esoteric knowledge that is needed to make a change in ourselves and in the world. So this is about raising our consciousness, which leads me into our next topic. What is consciousness? One way we can look at consciousness is that it is usually generalized as characteristics comprised of qualities such as self-awareness, sentience, sapience, and the ability to perceive a relationship with oneself and one's environment. So one thing that I like to explain to people was just imagine a circle, and then you put, self inside that circle. Let's just put that circle dot. Let's bring the circle dot into it. That dot represents the self. It's inside of that circle. And then that self then self-reflects. And now it has become dual. So now you create a vesica piscis. You have another circle that happens. So instantly, as soon as it becomes self-aware, it goes into duality, and it goes into self, consciousness, where it's now reflecting about what it is, who it is, what's going on in the environment, the internal realm, and then this also reflects into the external realm. So, that's a really basic way of looking at like how we become dualistic in our consciousness and how we become conscious itself. You can't be conscious without reflection of certain characteristics, whether internal or external. So you cannot have consciousness without becoming conscious of something. So it is the ability to perceive, a relationship between oneself, whether internal, and oneself externally. So it's the ability of a being to recognize patterns. This is also another thing, because consciousness is about correlative thinking. It's about finding patterns, ubiquity within the self-awareness and the awareness of the environment. So it's looking for patterns. We are looking for patterns and meaning with respect to events taking place both within ourselves and the realm which the self exists and operates in. So that's a big part of consciousness. And I think a great book for people to look into to check out some deeper aspects of consciousness is Esotericism and Simple by R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. And he really breaks down some of the fundamental, aspects of consciousness. And I will give just a little read from his book here, from chapter 5, page 15. And I'm not going to get deeply into it, but just read a little quote from him. And he says, fundamentally, consciousness has two aspects. One is the result of comparison, the other of identification. Both aspects need to be inscribed. One is organic or cerebral inscription, and the other is vital or functional. So what he's talking about here is that there's an innate consciousness within us, something that is intrinsic and innate within the being, and it is something that is not birthed from the biology of the being, that the biology is just simply the antenna to tune into that. And then there's another aspect of consciousness, which is something that is coming as a result from that source signal and from the biology being able to actually interpret that signal. So there's these two aspects to consciousness, and you really read this chapter in the book, chapter 5, page 15, he really breaks that down, and I think that's a very good place to start for people to really understand the aspects. Because in modern science, we have the idea that consciousness is generated from the brain. And in my point of view, and in the studies that I've seen, consciousness does not generate from the brain. It is an external source. The brain is simply the antenna to pick up on that. The study of consciousness is probably going to be infinite, because consciousness itself is infinite in my point of view. So consciousness is the reality engine. It is the source of all that we see and that we are aware of. I would recommend you to actually study quantum mechanics, especially the double slit experiment, to understand a little bit more about how consciousness works and how the wave function collapses when it becomes observed. Let's take another look here at another concept from consciousness. Ideas that are in the minds of people, right? Well, let's look at the definition of idea. Idea means archetype, or concept of the thing in the mind of God. Now pay very close attention to that. It is a concept of a thing in the mind of God. That's what the literal definition says when you look it up. But I find it very interesting also that it is an archetype. And the universe speaks to us in archetype symbolism. Or you can say God speaks to us in symbolism. Some other definition you may find for idea is form, the look of a thing, a kind, sort, nature, mode, fashion. So ideas are archetypal thought forms that are created from the collective mind or source consciousness. And it makes complete sense to me that it is an archetypal form coming from, the totality of consciousness or source, or if you feel comfortable using the word God, I completely have no issues using that word either. But I think, we all must become self-aware, and this goes back to that allegory of the cave as well. Self-awareness is the key to being able to find the truth as well. Without self-awareness, you're going to be reading in for illusions, and you're going to be cut off to a certain degree. You're not going to be tuning into the right channels to be able to listen to the source consciousness. And that's a big thing that a lot of people get stuck in, is the static. They get stuck in that static state of consciousness. And that can be a very detrimental place, especially when we're trying to make a better world and also build better selves to actually create that better world. But the brain is so complex, we really don't know exactly how it all works, and maybe we will never know how it all works. But the main part that I just want to hammer on is that it's not the main thing that creates consciousness. It does not generate consciousness. It picks up on the source. I would highly recommend Bruce Lipton's work in this area to understand this more. He is a epigenetic biologist that really helps to break these things down in a very scientific and peer-reviewed manner. So all his work is peer-reviewed, and it's all evidence-based. And he has a book called The Biology of Belief, which is really, really profound, and I would recommend that to anybody that is interested in studying this more in-depthly. So what needs to take place for a true paradigm shift is a realization of the true self. And this is directly related to becoming conscious of our modalities of thinking, feeling, and behaving. All knowledge really worth understanding is contained within the self and the environment in which the self operates in. The knowledge that is actually going to get us out of the cesspool that we have trapped ourselves in as a species is knowledge of natural law and the self. And this has to do with who we ultimately are and our value as spiritual beings here on this plane of existence. Why is this knowledge of critical importance? Because it gets us to the root causal factors of how we created the condition that we are in. One of the requirements to help end the suffering here on Earth is that we need the ability, the tools at our disposal, for us to be able to discern between falsehood and the truth. This is why we started out with the trivium and quadrivium on this podcast. Now, understanding the brain functionality and consciousness correlates to how we discover truth. But to kind of move forward here in the discussion, we're just going to cover the basic brain functions. We're not getting into the complete neurology and the study of, how the complete brain works. But to understand the basic brain functions is really important because it is about correlating archetypal knowledge, and it's about understanding yourself. One of the things I want to say here is that the human brain is probably, and definitely to me, the most powerful computer, and it's known to process about 1 billion neurons, and about 1 quadrillion connections known as synapses are stored within it. And the brain's storage capacity alone is about 100 terabytes to 2.5 petabytes, which is just completely beyond. And this is just from modern studies, so, I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually well beyond all this. And this is just what we're finding out today. So it can process about 400 billion bits of information a second. that is so fast, you know. So the brain is such a powerful and sacred instrument. This is why we need to keep our brains healthy, because if your brain becomes unhealthy, if it's filled with toxins, if it's flooded with fluoride or anything that can actually damage the glands in the brain, or damage the synapses, or damage the ability for the neurons to travel, you're not going to be able to think properly. So a lot of the issues that we face today, I think, is from actually some physical brain damage that's happened to us over a long period of time, and also from, you know, just this lifestyle. So trauma really can damage the brain. Any type of trauma, and we can get into trauma stuff in the future, but trauma will actually make the brain not function as well as it should. Now you can overcome that, obviously, because of something known as neuroplasticity, which the brain can rewrite itself. And that's actually a book, The Brain That Rewrites Itself, which is really good. We have the cerebrum, which is one of the largest parts of the brain. And it contains the cerebral cortex, consisting of two hemispheres. And these are separated by a fissure, a main fissure between the two hemispheres. It holds many subcortical structures as well. And like I was saying, the brain health plays a critical role in human thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So it's extremely important for us to become familiar with the basic brain structures. But like Nate was talking about earlier, we have a triune aspect of the brain. We have three basic sections of the brain. So we'll start out with the lowest section, which is the oldest section in the brain, which is the brain stem, also known as the R complex or the cerebellum. And that means in Latin, little brain. So they correlated this to the small brain, which I felt was very interesting, and you'll see why here later on. So this region of the brain is the oldest in evolution and controls basic things like motor functions, respiratory, minor cognition, and basically, you know, just things like survival mechanics, fight or flight, you know, and it is mostly connected to the left brain hemisphere. The reason why they call it the reptilian brain is because there are no real emotions and not many clear and comprehensible intellectual thoughts. There are thoughts coming from this, like Nate was talking about, but to be able to recognize those, it's very basic. It's very basic thoughts. It's primordial thoughts, you know. It's just about survival, like I was talking about. So the next section of the brain is the limbic system of the brain.
All right, I think that's a good stopping point. I'm going to take a little break here. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And just to add, let me pick up the mic here. Just to add, he was talking about Dr. Bruce Lipton's book, which is called The Biology of Belief. That book it's unfathomably powerful. I hope that makes sense, and I hope I said that correctly. That book is so intense. That's one of the books that are on the, one of the many books that are on the list of book reviews for the Beagle Eye Visions. So we will get to that book eventually, but like I said, we're taking it through a stepwise progression. We started with very elementary books, very easy to read books, and then we're going to start getting into esoteric Hollywood, and we're going to start getting deeper into this knowledge, as we go on through this channel. So thanks for sticking around. I'll start recording part 2 here very shortly, and they will be uploaded. All right. So, yeah. Thanks for coming. Stay tuned.